Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another fascinating journey into the world of ideas? Today, we're diving into Eminent Historians by Arun Shourie.
Ah, Shari. Always a thought-provoking author.
He certainly is. For those unfamiliar, Shari is an acclaimed journalist, author, and former politician known for, well, not shying away from controversy.
Right, he's got that reputation for digging deep, challenging established narratives. And in Eminent Historians, he's turning that investigative lens towards, well, other historians.
Specifically, some prominent 20th century Indian historians.
Right.
What's intriguing is that Shourie isn't simply presenting an alternative version of history.
No, he's doing something a bit more analytical. He's dissecting their methodology, questioning their interpretations, and really putting their potential biases under the microscope.
And one of the main biases he highlights is what he sees as a Marxist and secularist slant that he claims colors their work.
And that's what makes the book so controversial. He's suggesting these historians weren't just offering different perspectives, but potentially distorting the narrative to fit a specific agenda.
So it's not just a disagreement over facts, but a deeper accusation of manipulating history to serve an ideology.
Exactly. Shourie's arguing they were downplaying or even omitting evidence that contradicted their viewpoint.
Can you give us an example of what Shourie's talking about?
When he talks about the portrayal of ancient Indian scientific achievements, he suggests these historians often downplayed contributions like, say, the invention of zero or advancements in astronomy.
Oh, why would they do that?
Shourie believes it was to fit their narrative of India as, well, a society predominantly defined by its spiritual and philosophical pursuits, rather than scientific or technological ones.
It sounds like Shourie is accusing them of being selective in their storytelling.
Yes, he calls it selective storytelling, emphasizing certain events and downplaying others to create a very specific picture. Think of it like curating a museum exhibit. You choose which artifacts to display and which to keep in storage. The artifacts themselves are real, but the selection shapes the visitor's experience.
So Shourie is arguing that these historians, by controlling the narrative, controlled how generations of Indians perceived their own history.
Right. But of course, the historians Shourie critiques had their own defense. They argued that they were challenging the dominant colonial narrative that had long shaped Indian historiography.
So they saw themselves as correcting a historical imbalance.
Exactly. They believed they were bringing to light neglected aspects of India's past, particularly the contributions of marginalized groups. But Shourie counters that in their effort to dismantle the colonial narrative, they might have swung too far in the opposite direction, creating their own set of biases and distortions.
It becomes a debate then, not just about historical facts, but about the very process of writing history. Who gets to tell the story, whose voices are amplified, and whose perspectives are sidelined.
Exactly. And that's where Shourie's concern about these historians' influence over institutions comes in.
Right. He talks about their positions in universities, research centers, even on textbook committees. How does he connect that to this larger issue of manipulating the historical narrative?
Well, he argues that this institutional control gave them immense power to influence how history was researched, taught, and presented to the public. They could promote their version of history while potentially suppressing opposing viewpoints.
So he's basically saying their control over academia allowed them to shape not only the historical narrative, but the very landscape of historical scholarship in India.
Yes, and that's a pretty bold claim. He's essentially suggesting a system that favored a particular ideological interpretation of history.
But how does he tie all of this to the question of textbooks and education specifically?
That's actually one of the most controversial parts of his argument. Shourie contends that these, what he sees as skewed narratives, were often incorporated into school textbooks.
So it's not just an academic debate anymore. It's about the information being passed on to young minds, shaping how they understand their nation's past. We'll definitely need to delve into that more, but first, let's look at some of the specific examples Shourie uses to illustrate his points. He spends quite a bit of time on the Mughal era, right?
He does. The Mughal period is particularly contentious in Indian history, and Shourie really focuses on how these historians portrayed it. While he acknowledges the Mughals' significant contributions to, architecture, art, and culture, he argues that these historians often downplayed some of the more controversial aspects of their rule.
Like what specifically?
For example, he takes issue with how they depicted the Mughal policies that impacted religious minorities, particularly Hindus. He claims they presented a rather sanitized version of Mughal rule, emphasizing their tolerance and cultural syncretism while downplaying any instances of, say, religious persecution or forced conversions.
So it's a matter of emphasis and interpretation. One historian's balanced account might be another historian's deliberate distortion.
Precisely. And that highlights a fundamental question about writing history. Can we ever achieve true objectivity when we're dealing with the past?
It's like trying to piece together a puzzle with some pieces missing. The picture we create will always be incomplete, subject to our own perspectives and interpretations.
Exactly. And Shourie's book really forces us to grapple with that uncomfortable reality. It reminds us that history is always filtered through the lens of the present. The questions we ask, the sources we choose, even the interpretations we offer, are all shaped by our own values, beliefs, and experiences.
Which is what makes the study of history both challenging and so fascinating. And speaking of challenges, we can't ignore the criticisms directed at Shourie's book itself. Some argue that he has his own agenda.
Well, absolutely. Some critics, particularly those who align with the historians Shourie's critiquing, accuse him of being motivated by Hindu nationalist ideology. They argue his book is part of a larger effort to rewrite Indian history in a way that glorifies the Hindu past while demonizing Muslim rule.
So we have a meta-narrative here, a debate about the motivations and potential biases of historians writing about history.
Right. It adds another layer of complexity. It's like we're constantly peeling back layers of interpretation, trying to get to the core of historical truth.
But before we get lost in the meta, let's bring this back to our listeners. Why should someone who's not a historian or an academic care about potential biases in historical writing, or these complexities of interpreting the past?
Because history isn't just confined to textbooks and ivory towers. It shapes how we understand who we are, where we come from, and ultimately the world we live in today. When historical narratives are incomplete, distorted, or presented from a limited perspective, it impacts how we perceive the present and make decisions about the future.
So Shourie's book is a reminder to be critical consumers of history. We need to be aware of potential biases, seek out diverse viewpoints, and approach the past with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Exactly. And that's especially crucial in today's world, where information is so readily available, often presented in ways that confirm our existing beliefs. We need to develop the skills to critically evaluate historical information and recognize that history isn't a fixed, unchanging truth, but rather a complex tapestry woven from different perspectives and interpretations.
And that brings us to the heart of Shourie's argument, which is the impact of these, what he claims are skewed narratives, on education in India.
Right. His focus on how these narratives found their way into textbooks and, in his view, shaped the historical understanding of generations of students. Definitely a topic we need to explore further. So Shourie's point is these historians, because they had so much sway over these institutions, they could actually influence what went into the textbooks.
Yeah, he's arguing they shaped what generations of students learned about their own history. And it wasn't just about what was left out, but also the emphasis, the framing of certain events.
It's like they were subtly guiding how students perceive their past.
And by extension, their present, their identity, maybe even their political views. Very powerful stuff.
It is. It raises questions about whose responsibility it is, ensuring that students get exposed to a range of perspectives, different ways of looking at history.
Absolutely. So while Shourie focuses on this specific group of historians and what he sees as their biases, it raises those bigger issues about education, right? Like, what role does it play in shaping how we see history and even how we form our national identity?
Exactly. He makes us think critically about what we read in textbooks, consider whether there might be, hidden biases in those narratives.
Which brings us back to Shourie himself, right? Didn't some critics say that he's got his own biases?
Oh, yeah. Some people, especially those who agreed with the historian Shourie was going after, they said, look, Shourie's coming at this with his own political views, his own leanings.
So how do we, as readers, sort through all that? We've got these competing claims, different interpretations. It can get pretty confusing.
Well, I think it's important to remember, no historical account is perfectly objective. Everyone's got their own baggage, their own perspective, and that's going to influence how they interpret the past.
So how do we, as you said, sort through those different perspectives and come up with an understanding of history that makes sense? How do we even know what's accurate?
I think it takes a critical approach. You have to be aware that bias can creep in anywhere, even in Shourie's work. Look at the evidence he uses. think about his sources, and be open to other ways of interpreting things.
So we need to be like historical detectives, weighing the evidence, considering all sides, and then coming to our own conclusions.
Exactly. That's what makes history so interesting. It's not about just passively absorbing information, but really engaging with it, wrestling with it, and forming your own understanding.
So Sherry's book, while controversial, it reminds us that history isn't some set-in-stone truth. It's more like an ongoing conversation, always evolving, with different perspectives and interpretations.
Precisely. And by reading books like Eminent Historians, even if you disagree with some of it, it helps you become a more careful reader of history. You learn to question what you read, to spot potential biases, and to strive for a more balanced, well-rounded understanding of the past.
It's like he's giving us this toolkit to, like, take apart historical narratives. We can examine each piece, the sources, the interpretations, and then try to build a more accurate picture of what happened.
Yes. Shore's book is like a spotlight shining on the choices historians make, how they build their narratives, and how those narratives can shape our understanding of ourselves, of the world.
And in doing that, he encourages us to move beyond just accepting what we're told and to actively engage with history's complexities, right? I mean, our understanding of the past is always changing as new evidence emerges and new perspectives come up.
That's right. He reminds us that history isn't something that happened a long time ago, and that's it. It's alive. It still shapes us today and influences our future.
And understanding those biases, those influences, is really crucial for developing a more informed, critical understanding of the world we're living in right now. So we're back to that basic question. If history is open to interpretation, how can we know if we're getting the full story?
Oh, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's no simple answer. But one important thing is to look for diverse perspectives. Don't rely on just one source or one interpretation. Explore different accounts, think about the author's background, and be willing to consider different, even conflicting viewpoints.
It's about seeing history as a tapestry with all these different threads woven together. Each thread represents a different piece of evidence, a different perspective. And our job is to examine each one, understand how they connect, and appreciate the complexity of the patterns they form.
And that's what makes studying history so rewarding. It's a constant process of discovery, questioning, and learning more.
In Shourie's book, Eminent Historians, it really pushes us on that journey. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths, to question accepted narratives, and to really search for a more nuanced and inclusive understanding of our shared past.
It reminds us that history isn't just something we observe. It's a dynamic story that we're all part of, shaping and interpreting. And maybe that's the book's greatest contribution. It sparked this important conversation about the power of historical narratives and how crucial it is to engage with the past critically.
And as we dig deeper into that conversation, it's good to keep in mind that Shourie's book is just one perspective among many. While he points out potential biases in others' work, his own work might have its own biases too.
Right. It's important to approach Shourie's book, and any historical work really, with some healthy skepticism. Not dismissing his arguments out of hand, but not just taking them at face value either.
It's all about engaging with his ideas thoughtfully, considering other viewpoints, and remembering that history is a conversation, a dialogue where we keep questioning, debating, and reevaluating our understanding of the past.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not about finding the one right answer or ending the debate. It's about embracing the complexity and ambiguity of history and constantly seeking new understanding.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Eminent Historians, let's think about what this means for us as we try to make sense of all the historical information out there, especially when it seems contradictory. What are the big takeaways from exploring Shourie's work and the debates it sparked?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is we can't just be passive about how we learn history. We have to take an active role in shaping our own understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't just swallow whatever version of history we're given, and we need to be critical, question what we read, and look for different points of view.
It's like Shourie saying, be a historian yourself. Dig into the evidence, question the sources, and draw your own conclusions.
Right. Be skeptical of everything, even things that sound really authoritative. Ask yourself, who wrote this? What was their agenda? What evidence are they using? And what might be missing from their account? And we also need to remember history isn't just about the past. It's very much alive in the present, shaping how we see the world and make decisions about the future.
That's so true. The stories we choose to believe, the interpretations we favor, they have a huge impact on how we view ourselves, our communities, our whole world.
And that's why it's so crucial to understand that bias can exist in any historical account, even those that seem really objective. History is often a battleground, with different sides fighting to control the narrative.
Yeah, it's messy. But we need to engage with that messiness. Approach it with nuance and try to understand all those different perspectives.
And that's what makes Shourie's book so important. He reminds us that history isn't just one single truth, but this complex tapestry with all these threads of evidence and interpretation woven together.
And our job, if we really want to understand history, is to untangle those threads, examine them closely, and then try to see the whole picture with all its complexity and richness.
So, to wrap things up, we encourage all our deep divers to continue exploring this topic. Read Eminent Historians, grapple with Shourie's arguments, look for other perspectives, and keep thinking about how we investigate and interpret the past.
And as you're doing that, think about this. If history is always open to interpretation, how can we as individuals and as a society ensure we're getting as balanced and complete a picture as possible? It's a big question with no easy answers.
It is. What responsibility do historians have to present a nuanced, multifaceted view of history? And how can we, as citizens, contribute to a more informed and critical understanding of the past?
Lots to think about. So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep those minds engaged. Until next time, happy reading and happy reflecting.